is Paul Vermeulen from the Smet Vermeulen architecten. We are in our office in Ghent, Belgium, in the Easter COVID break, and talking about architecture, about this particular project. Feels a bit like a sort of a Decamerone, talking about architecture for killing time while getting bored by the virus. So first explaining not where Antwerp is, but where Left Bank is. It's the other side of the Schelde River, and it has actually very little to do with the center of Antwerp. It's actually very nearby, 2 tunnels connected to the city center. So you could say it's a central piece of the city, but on Left Bank they think differently. They think they are sort of a village, and the outlook of the area is quite different as well. There is a lot of social housing there. The people living there are, in general terms, not very much liked by policymakers, politicians. But end of 20th century, a brief was composed for additional social services in the area. So you can see on the plan where what area of a very large area, in fact, was devoted to that. And years later, 2006, an open competition, an open oproep by the Vlaams Bouwmeester was launched. They asked for teams of urban designers joined with architects. And Technum, Bart van Gassen, who was the urban designer that we worked with, judged that since much of the brief was in architectural terms, with very detailed specific briefs for buildings and programs, he thought that it would be necessary to make this urban design together with a few architects, enough to cope for all of the buildings that were needed. So we teamed up then with Technum, of course, and with the Vylder, Vinck, Taillieu and Tom Thijs architecten. And well, we have fond memories of that collaboration. What I will show in the presentation is the joint work that we did, the statements we made on the level of urban design, and then well, the 3 buildings we designed ourselves, but the work of our friends and partners will every now and then appear in the photographs. So in the beginning, this brief was for a number of clients, all of them official. Very soon, the social housing company quitted. So there were left the Antwerp Zorgbedrijf, the care company, so the official body that organizes care in the city. Leer in de Stad as well, the board for educational programs. They were more specifically asking a kindergarten. And then at a certain point, a developer called THV IGLO here was appointed by the Zorgbedrijf for doing for taking care of a part of the design of the program. So the project is called Intergenerationeel because it was about, well, most of the programs were dealing with either the elderly or the very young kids for whom a kindergarten was required. And then much of the program for elderly was housing, assisted living in flats, but also an elderly care home that we designed. So when starting the design, what struck us was that these two very different sorts of garden city were actually sharing a grid. They were aligned, and this was actually the observation that gave rise to the plan. What was built in between the high rises that you can see over here and there was a bit well, a mess of a bit of everything. But what interested us was that the high rises were on the same grid as these pitched roof houses that you could see in the previous slide, forming sort of a chamber delineated with the high rises, with the highest one called Chicago Tower over there. So what we then thought was that the most important thing was to set the grid right, since the alignments were about the grid. We had to strengthen the grid and organize the buildings, the additional buildings, the ones we had to design for. We had to arrange them to this grid. So a study drawing over here. This was very much the first idea. Instead of emphasizing the street that separates the low-rise from the high-rise, we thought that the emphasis should be more to the north, in between the three high-rise slabs, and that this would be the center of the plan, much rather than the division between both of them, which then made it possible that the low-rise would cross the street and slide into the high-rise chamber. So by doing this, so this is the new street that we integrated over there, I think we could strengthen the overall design of this part of left bank that was actually a large-scale grid that could accommodate very different sorts of urban fabric, urban tissue. And by doing this, we could make sure that the high-rise area and the other areas very much near to it, adjacent to it, would evolve into an organic whole, one neighborhood, much more than what it was now, segregated places. You would never dare to go from the one side of this street into the other street, into the other side of the street where these high-rise towers were, and where it was assumed different sorts of people would live. So this is the result of that operation. You can see the low-rise ignoring the breach that was made in the fabric before and sliding into or in between the high rises. In the forefront are assisted living flats designed by Tom Thees, and they announce from the street the theme of what is built further on by ourselves, a sort of rhythm of building, garden, etc. And what you can see is, of course, that layering of the urban scene is coming about. This is from one of the loggias of the elderly home, looking back first towards Tom's flats and then further on into the older low-rise garden city. Same observation in the other direction towards the Chicago Tower. And the window on the left, that's the first image. You will see more of them. of the Vylder Taillieu building, service center on the ground floor with then also service flats, assisted living flats above them as a sort of first layer in front of that even higher tower beneath it. And on the forefront, it looks like it is very close to the window, but it really isn't, is our kindergarten. So the area with the high-rises is characterized, of course, by very large park areas that we quite like. We were not making a plan against them. We were not making a plan against the high-rises. What it was much more about was about adding on to them something that would be complementary. There were already parks, but what was still missing were gardens. And then the difference, I would say, is that a garden is something much closer to your own living space. You could easily get out, make use of the garden, step in, step back, while the park will also have a larger feel about it and be more public. So low-rise as the complement of the high-rise, gardens as the complement of the parks. That was the idea. So two complementary sorts of environments, as the picture shows. There were many sorts of gardens. Here you can see them very shortly after completion, so still a bit bare, but small gardens that are immediately accessible from the rooms of the elderly care home, or from on the other side of the fence of the kindergarten. And then to the right-hand side, you see one of the gardens that is closed off. That is a safe environment. Of course, there will be people with dementia here, and they would have a more safe courtyard over here. Still another courtyard where other flats for assisted living and the kitchen and the cafeteria of the elderly home join. And still other gardens where the kindergarten and those of the elderly home facility also meet and joining gardens. So this main street in the middle of the high-rises was meant to have all main addresses of the facilities. So that is what this scheme makes clear. So by building it and by actually a very organic interplay between the designers, actually very little was put on paper as agreements among the designers. We worked together and reacted to what we saw the other was doing. But you could all of a sudden get something that felt like a street with echoes of other types of streets that you would be acquainted with in the middle of this high-rise environment, like a small stretch of a colonnade in Jan and Inge's building, or a corner building in a high-rise area. Unforeseen, but they show that the area has evolved. The street is actually longer than the central area. It crosses the whole park area, goes from one edge to the other. And first it's a sort of a park alley, where then in the middle the density rises, as you can see in the background over there. An area where that feels more like a center, where all these new facilities are. and then out again, back into the parks, up to the next large axis of left bank, turning 180 degrees, coming back, the building to the right-hand side with the sloping roof is our kindergarten, and behind you can see some of the elderly care facility, Jan en Inge's dienstencentrum, service center, and the flats on the left-hand side of the street. A street scene caught by Harry Gruijaert next to our facility. And as a matter of fact, it's not only about the main street that I just showed, but also the side streets received a street-like layout and a street-like feel. You can see that the elderly care home has, next to the main address, which is on the main street, there are more addresses, extra addresses for what was called, flats that you would stay in for only a short while. So you would have your own entrance going in there. You would have to need to go through the main entrance. Or you can also see garden entrances of the ground floor rooms of the elderly care home. So there are addresses there as well. And the other side street where, well, we had to wait quite long for it, but the grocer finally took a rent in our corner building. So we started out with these three clients that I showed, that I mentioned, and in the end, I think we can say that this simple idea of making an axis, or making a center, a sort of emphasis within this high-rise environment, was the idea that was needed to get other investors interested and to do their thing. So you saw the supermarket that realized a new building. This grocer is an example. Even the social housing company did some investments in one of their blocks, and more actually, if I am frank, should be done. Another early scheme showing how we thought about the relationship between the high rises and the low rise. The folded roofs, the sloping roofs were actually intentional to give the high rises that looked upon it sort of a roofscape to look upon, and also to break these large shadows that would fall down from the slabs. So they would interact with the varying heights of the roofs, and make a more gentle shadow on the ground. So this pancake-like thing over here was the first shape we thought the kindergarten would be in, but instead of a mushroom, it eventually ended up like a flying carpet. Views from within our elderly assisted living flats to show what the effect of these folded roofs are on the interior. More similar pictures could be shown here. And here a detail to show one of the other relationships between the low rise and the high rise. What we were really after was that we would build the low-rise buildings, the small buildings, with large-scale materials. So we didn't want to have them in small building material, much rather large pieces that would remind the paneling, which are of course large building components of the slabs, and other details like these little chimneys also have echoes in the flats on different instances. So the building that we did for this private developer, the assisted living, here in the middle of the slide. Well, this party really insisted on brick. It was brick, nothing else. It should have been brick. So then we tried to treat the brick as if it was large scale, as big pieces of facade, as you can see, cut apart by the loggias, as you can see, and then, of course, in the plinth, large concrete panels that were also present in the elderly home facility. Then we made them green to emphasize that they were the more public program there, with the cafeteria of the elderly home in the front. A study of the square, a square that is on this main street that I explained. Why the square? Because on a limited stretch of street length, quite a number of addresses had to be realized. So at least 2 for the building with the service flats, the entrance of the kindergarten, just appearing here in the corner, going like this, and then the main entrance and a number of secondary entrances for the elderly home care facility. The cafeteria, of course, and the main entrance. The main entrance here on the square that then housed a number of additional addresses, a door for hairdresser, ergotherapy, other pedicure, things like that, manicure. Within in the end of this courtyard, the entrance towards the housing facilities. So this is a detail, of course, of how this building was designed, but it explains what the idea about the elderly home care facility really was. We thought that the most private rooms of it should be more adjacent to the low-rise garden city, and the more public parts of it that would also have visitors from outside the facility, people who would live, for instance, in another street or in one of the high-rise flats, could also make use of them, and therefore we wanted to have them closer by on the square and on the main street. So in more abstract language, there's a gradient from public to private throughout this building. Same place looking in the other direction, with on the right hand side the different doors of all the facilities offered to senior citizens, either from within or from without the facility. The garden of the kindergarten next to it. We have always hoped, and I'm sure one day it will happen, that interactions between these generations, it's an intergenerational project, will occur on either side of the fences. and you look back on the square, and then after the square, Jan and Inge's building and the Chicago Tower over there. Same thing looking in the other direction, but on the right hand side, the plinth of the kindergarten, one corner of this square. And stepping back even more from the service center on the other side of the street, looking onto the square. Plans to the left hand side, it's the ground floor, and then on the right hand side, the first floor. Well, the ground floor plan on the left hand side shows why this square is necessary for allowing all addresses and entrances, or at least some of them, on the main streets via the square. Entrance for the kindergarten is right here. And entrance for the flats is here. Entrance for the shop area on one side is here. The grocer is right here, you remember that. Cafeteria, and then this strip of other facilities along that courtyard adjacent to this other courtyard. Well, you can see the section, high rises with a low rise in between. And what is suggested in the section, and not just in the section, I think, is that well, actually both the adult buildings for the elderly and more childlike building for the kindergarten have actually the same concept. It's a gabled roof perpendicular to the main street, albeit that proportions of the one for the kids are a bit out of hand. So it's less controlled, less, well, it's just flat. So a set of slides to take you from the square to the other side of the elderly care home. Photographs by Marius Grootveld, showing the hairdresser, the cafeteria below. And then after that, you reach this closed off courtyard that I spoke of. And then you could still walk on, either take the stair or the elevator to the stories above, or go right ahead on the ground floor. And then you would come in this space, which is, which consists of a series of living rooms. There's a room for smokers, quite peculiar, we thought, but smokers have the right to have a room in the elderly care facility. This would be one of the arteries where staff would move through. And then eventually on the floor above, first floor, you would have very much the same concept with the corridor in the middle, but much more open. The areas for eating together are more open to the corridor than they are on the lower floor. They have this window that you can see here is the same as this one. They have an outdoor space nearby. And these are the areas where people can meet in larger groups to share some of the day together. Again, same thing on the second floor, where you can see that the plan again changed with shorter wings. Another position of the terraces as to the living room areas, like this. And so what I hope to make clear from this little promenade is that even if the building is very regular in its plan and the way it has been built, you are always perfectly aware where you are, whether you are on ground floor, first floor, second floor, the relationships to the outside and to the main rooms, to the main components of the building itself are different. So you are not going to be, by accident on the wrong floor. You will recognize where you are. And then finally, one of the corridors where the rooms are. So we didn't want to think of this building as if the private room, which is of course a small room with a bathroom, etc., all in there, that would be your home. You don't know, actually your home is the whole building. These dining areas, living rooms on the corridor, on the central corridor, are also your home. The cafeteria in front is also your home. This central courtyard is all your home. And that is how this gradient works for you as an inhabitant. You can choose where you spend an hour of your day in privacy, in your own room, or together with others, or on the outside in one of the gardens, on one of the terraces. Yes, so that is what this gradient really is about as a daily experience for inhabitants. Another room in different colors. Still another room. This one is below the roof, as you can see. And again, other colors, and some of the stuff, some of the furniture that you see is brought in by the inhabitants themselves. So this is actually the scheme that we, or the study that we made for these rooms. There are 120 of them, and well, you can see there has to be a place for a hospital bed where you could be treated if necessary, but then you can choose how open you make the corner for bathroom with these folding doors over there. And we have a large height in the middle of the room, because only the side areas have lowered ceilings where then the necessary piping and ventilation shafts, etc., are hidden in. So 3 sketches above that show that rooms on each of the 3 floors feel different. To the left-hand side, you have a French windows. You could just step outside because you have a garden in front of you. You cannot do that on the first floor, of course, that it wouldn't make sense. It would be, well, creating the wrong idea if you would have French windows there. So windows, they have a balustrade, 70 centimeters high or something like that, so you can easily look down when you are in a chair. And then in the ones above, you feel that you are that you are below the roof, that you are in a sort of attic situation because you feel the hovering of the roof above you. So all this is, of course, to make sure that that people who can suffer from a faulty memory or something like that really recognize the places where they are supposed to be as their own, and that they not all of a sudden end up in a different one. And what you can see here is how the repetitive rooms were made specific by color schemes, by a combination of three surfaces that each have their colors, all of them in different combinations, and then you would have a unique combination for each of them. Then adding on to them that that you differentiate ground floor, first floor, second floor, and we think that this repetitive design still makes for a lot of individuality inside. Maybe a few words on this detailing of the facade of it. It's actually a facade, a plastered facade with plaster on insulation boards immediately. So something that is usually considered as a very cheap way. Cheap in all senses of the word, as a vulgar, an ordinary way of doing things. But we thought that that we could learn from some of the 19th century buildings that we have. Well, I can see some when I look outside the window here. Plastered facades in the late 19th century, early 20th century were of course also subdivided by joints to make them unlike buildings that were built in large pieces of tailored stone. So, and we thought, since we are thinking here of large panels, we can subdivide our plastered surface, our insulation boards, also with joints, much larger than they would be in a stone facade. So it's not similar to a 19th century facade, but it's something that makes you wonder whether you see paneling or whether you see, it's a sort of gentle lie that you expect to receive from a plastered facade. And as you can see, then we chose 5 colors because the color had to be added on them after the plaster was done. And we numbered all these cases 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And since there is a lot of irregularity, we ended up with a random facade that was done actually quite easily. So all these sloped roofs next to each other should allow for a space in between, which is for gutters to pass by. And then in this loggia, they provide for a nice detail, as you can see. So you have in a covered loggia all of a sudden a small part that is on the outside. It's actually the logic of how to build this thing and how to deal with the module of it. Yes, 2 buildings together. Here, I will say a few words on how we treated the wish for having large-scale materials in this building, in the kindergarten. That large-scale material is cement board. We had larger panels below. Oh, sorry. We had larger panels below an aluminum horizon that is suggested here. And we had smaller dimensions above, so to make the building lighter when it goes up, and also to stress the importance of that horizon. And furthermore, we had that was a precise requirement from the clients. He wanted that if one of the panels would break, which is of course always possible, he should be able to remove one and replace one without having to unmount the full facade. It's evident, of course. So that's why you see the visible screwing. And then we thought that they should be slightly on different levels. So we thought of a wrongly buttoned jacket. That was what the idea here was. And then the horizon was, of course, important because this is a building where kids, if they are there for maybe 2 years, 3 years maybe, they would really grow. They would grow dramatically in size. So if the building would have both on the outside and the inside a sort of insistent line, a horizon where you can see that you are getting closer or further off, that would be something that, well, that makes for an experience for kids, probably an unconscious one, but nevertheless. So that's why we studied the units on the inside, both on the right-hand side from the perspective of one of the caretakers, an adult, but also from the aspect of the kids, so who would have their eye level much lower than the adults would have. And so the space and the slightly and the ceiling that would slightly go up would be more dramatic for them, more clearly felt. Because that is, of course, what happens if you keep 3 sides of the rectangular horizontal, and the 4th side would have a gabled roof with a high point in the middle. Well, then you get this sort of yeah. Now I don't remember really what the word for this is, but yeah, a hyperbolic, parabolic, I don't know, but think of Gaudi or something like that, and this would then be what you get. And it's actually quite easy to build if you have a strict plan with a grid in it. You each of the gradations of this roof that goes up are fairly easy to make. So it was actually not a big deal to do it. Above the horizon is near to the ceiling, and then below the ceiling is well above the horizon. So what we imagined, but we are not really sure if this this advice has been taken seriously. But what we thought that the smallest kids should be in the upper rooms, and then as they grow, they should go to the other ones. I'm not sure if they do it, but it would be great. The outside street scene again, where the constructional system is of course not visible, since everything is clad, but it is suggested by the sequence of colors in the plinth. So each of these different colors corresponds to one bay in the structural concept of the building. Yes, so the window that you see here with the pink print on it is a courtyard, and this is the courtyard photographed by Harry Greijaard on a later time than Philippe Dujardin did, who came there only after completion of the building. There is an outside garden there which has plants and grass. So we wanted to make very clear that this was stony, and that is why the grass carpet here is red, artificial. More red on the inside, and combinations details. It's structurally a very severe building, but it has lots of small interior details that are required actually all by the brief, or mostly by the brief actually, to meet the need of either the caretakers of the kids or the kids themselves. And so well, there was of course an acoustic requirement because these kids can yell. So what we thought was that we would have baffles that would work on both sides, the lower side and the upper side, would both do their job. And if combined with the suspended lamps, you would have something like a bird migrating through this building, and they fly in the sense of where the roof goes up, as you can tell from their neck over here. And then small look-throughs that were required, a low drinking fountain for the kids, and door handles that are on a very high position. So the low and the high are all in unexpected places in this building. The toilets, important activity in the education of the kids. And then the small cupboards where the stuff their parents give them in the beginning of the day are stuck, for each kid one. And then the other side of the cupboard is in a corridor where the parents can open a little door, put the stuff in, and then the caretaker can find it on the other side when dealing with the kid. Again, the base, the structural base in the colors of the flooring, and then this is the ceiling built with paint, so only the skylights in these increasingly high, well, not cylinders, but cones are supposed to be seen, and the rest is done away in black paint. So you have a particular sort of atmosphere, fairy tale-like, I hope, in these corridors. And then this is where you enter the building. So one of the most peculiar things in the design of this building was that there was a sort of idea that it is not good for a building for childcare to have windows. So that is the strangest of ideas, of course, but windows are where adults with wrong intentions could look onto the kids and gaze onto them and make pictures, etc., etc. So actually, if we would have made no windows at all, that would have fitted the client very well. Luckily, there was also the Antwerp Bouwmeister, who of course didn't want to hear of such a thing, and nor did we. So for the central hall that this building has, we thought that maybe not the kids, but their buggies could be largely exposed to the main street. And maybe you could also tell from other pictures also the office of the manager, where the photocopy machine is, or the kitchen are also on the street. So it's a building where you can see activities and not necessarily the kids. By the way, this is also the reason why there is the pink print on the window towards the patio patios. So the buggy parking here and the void where there is a small conference room above. Seen from the void down where the coming and going of the kids is taking place. Picture of Harry Gruijert. This one as well is from Harry, where you see the other side of the void over here and the window into the meeting room over there. This is the photocopy machine. So, and the entrance that leads towards the square like that. So, a sort of well, street scenery that is still invited. And the central patio covered, or as a cutout from the flying carpet with samovars next to it. Models photographed by Marius with the severe grid of the kindergarten building and the facade grid of the elderly home facility combined, and the grid of the high-rise here in pencil on the wall behind it. So all of it making sense in terms of how to build it, and still providing an unexpected and rich environment for daily living. And this is, I think, my final slide. The big model that we built of it was for an exhibition in the Single. And of course, we didn't know what to do with it afterwards. And we offered it to the elderly care home. So we thought it would be nice for them to have, to be able to study the place where they were living and make something out of it. So all this is a few years past, and I think the model has now more or less fallen apart, or the remnants of it are in the basement. So that's it. Thank you.
At Brickworks Vande Moortel, we make high-quality bricks, slips and clay pavers in unique colours and sizes. From our new brick lab in Belgium, we support architects in the UK and around Europe. As a partner, we collaborate with the architect to transform his vision into reality with an open mind, technical knowledge and tailor-made solutions. As a family-held company, we remain accessible at all levels, which makes our company extremely customer-focused. In all those years, we never lost our core values and stand for sustainability, quality, teamwork, and of course, our passion that we would love to share with you.